Picture this. You are a pilot, 19 years old, maybe 20. You climbed into a cockpit this morning the same way you did yesterday and the day before that. Routine, almost boring. Then you see it. Out there, through the scratched plexiglass of your canopy. Something that does not make sense. A shape in the sky. Then another. Then 10 more. Then you stop counting because the numbers no longer matter. The sky is full of them. Dozens of aircraft moving in a slow, heavy formation. Almost majestic, almost peaceful. Like a migration of enormous iron birds crossing the blue Mediterranean on a Sunday afternoon in April. They do not know you are there. They do not know that someone, somewhere, in a basement in England, already read their orders before their own commanders did. They do not know that this crossing, carefully planned, desperately needed, is already over. You pull back the throttle. Your squadron forms up around you. 47 fighters, hungry, ready. Below the water shimmers. Above the sun hangs indifferent. And somewhere in that slow, graceful formation of transport planes, hundreds of men are thinking about home. They will not make it. What happens in the next 20 minutes will be talked about for 80 years. What kind of intelligence, what kind of coordination, what kind of terrible precision does it take to erase a fleet from the sky? April 1943, North Africa. The war in the desert is almost over, and everyone knows it. The Afrika Korps, once the pride of the Third Reich, is cornered, squeezed between the British Eighth Army pushing from the east and American forces closing from the west. Tunisia is the last foothold, a shrinking pocket of sand and dust and desperation. Germany needs to supply those men, ammunition, fuel, reinforcements, and if supply is no longer possible, evacuation. The solution is the air bridge, a constant stream of Junkers Ju-52 transport aircraft crossing the narrow stretch of the Mediterranean between Sicily and Tunisia. Day after day, slow, lumbering, predictable, the problem is that nothing is secret anymore. British code breakers at Bletchley Park have cracked the German Enigma encryption system. The intelligence product they generate is called Ultra, and Ultra means the Allies can read German military communications almost in real time. Departure times, flight routes, aircraft counts, escort strength, all of it laid out like a menu. The American 57th Fighter Group is based in Tunisia. P-40 Warhawks, experienced pilots hardened by months of brutal desert combat. They have been waiting for an opportunity like this. On the morning of April 18, 1943, that opportunity arrives. The Germans plan a major resupply run, a big one. The Americans plan a reception. What follows is not really a battle. It is a reckoning. By the spring of 1943, the Axis position in North Africa was beyond saving. Everyone with a map and a calendar could see it. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, had already left. Recalled to Germany on the 9th of March, officially for medical reasons. Unofficially, because Berlin did not want its most famous general captured. What remained in Tunisia was over 200,000 soldiers, German and Italian, packed into a pocket that shrank by the day. The supply situation was catastrophic. The sea routes were essentially closed. Allied submarines and aircraft had turned the Mediterranean into a graveyard for Axis shipping. Tankers, freighters, destroyers. The tonnage lost was staggering. By early 1943, the only reliable way to move material and men across to Tunisia was through the air. The workhorse of this operation was the Junkers Ju-52. A trimotor transport, corrugated metal skin, fixed landing gear. Not elegant, not fast. Built like a flying truck because that is exactly what it was. The Luftwaffe called it Tante Ju, Auntie Ju. The crews who flew her called her other things when she groaned through turbulence at cruise speed, fully loaded, with no fighter escort in sight. She was old technology by 1943 standards. The first trimotor prototype had flown in April of 1932. By the time the Afrika Korps was gasping in Tunisia, the Ju-52 was everywhere the Wehrmacht needed transport and nowhere it needed speed. Spain during the Civil War, Norway, Crete, the Eastern Front, and now North Africa. Flying the same routes, on a timetable the enemy could set a watch by. The air bridge operated out of Sicily, primarily from the airfields around Trapani and Palermo. The planes would load up, form into large formations for mutual protection, and fly southeast across the narrow strip of water that separates Sicily from Tunisia. The crossing took roughly an hour, then back again, repeat, every day. The Luftwaffe knew the risk. The Allied air forces over Tunisia were growing stronger every week. American groups, British squadrons, all competing for the same airspace, all hunting the same transports. The Germans responded by increasing escort strength. More Messerschmitt Bf-109s, more Bf-110 twin-engine fighters. Sometimes even Italian Macchi and Reggiane fighters joined the escort. It was not enough. The fundamental problem was not the escorts. It was the intelligence failure. Not the operational kind, where a reconnaissance plane spots your formation. Something deeper, more permanent, more ruinous. Bletchley Park had been reading Luftwaffe Enigma traffic since 1940. By 1943, the process was refined, fast, and frighteningly accurate. When German Air Transport Command in Sicily sent an encrypted message detailing the next day's convoy, British signals intelligence decoded it, processed it, and passed the information up the chain. The system had a name, Ultra. And Ultra, on the evening of April 17, 1943, delivered a gift. A large formation of Ju-52s, heavily loaded, would depart the following morning. April 18th, Palm Sunday. The route, the timing, the approximate strength, all of it, handed to the Allies on a plate. Colonel Arthur Salisbury, commanding the American 57th Fighter Group, had his orders before dawn. 47 P-40 Warhawks would be in position over the Gulf of Tunis at the right time. 12 British Spitfires from the Royal Air Force would fly top cover. Nobody told the Germans. The P-40 Warhawk was not the most glamorous fighter of the Second World War. It was not as fast as the Spitfire, not as nimble as the Japanese Zero, not as powerful as the later P-51 Mustang. American pilots flew it, fought with it, cursed at it, and trusted it, because they had no other choice, and because in the right hands, in the right situation, it was a lethal machine. 6 50 caliber machine guns in the wings, a tough airframe that could absorb punishment, an Allison V-1710 liquid-cooled engine that performed reasonably well at low and medium altitudes. The Warhawk liked to dive. It liked to accelerate in a descent. What it did not like was climbing fast or turning tight at altitude. Against Ju-52 transports flying low and slow over the Mediterranean, the Warhawk was perfect. The pilots of the 57th Fighter Group woke before sunrise on April 18th. Briefings were short and sharp. The intelligence was good, the coordinates were solid, and the timing had to be exact. Too early, and they would miss the formation. Too late, and the transports would be overland, scattering toward emergency strips. The rendezvous point was over the Gulf of Tunis, out over the water, where there was nothing below but blue and silence. They took off in the gray pre-dawn light and formed up in the air. 47 fighters climbing, setting course. The Spitfires from the Royal Air Force, 12 of them, joined and took position above. Their job was to deal with the German escort fighters. The P-40s would go for the transports. The flight out was uneventful, engines droning, eyes scanning, radios almost silent. Then someone called it out, low on the horizon, moving northeast a shape, then a cluster of shapes, then a wall of them. The German formation was enormous. Estimates from that morning vary. Between 65 and 100 aircraft in total. The Ju-52s flew in tight groups, low to the water, barely 300 meters altitude. Some accounts say the formation looked almost peaceful, orderly. The corrugated metal of the transports catching the afternoon light. The escort fighters were there, Bf-109s weaving above and to the sides. Some Bf-110s, heavier and slower, mixed in. But the ratio was wrong, completely, disastrously wrong. There were simply too many transports and not enough escorts. The Messerschmitts could not cover the whole formation. The moment the P-40s hit, the escorts would be overwhelmed, outnumbered, and forced to choose between defending themselves and protecting the lumbering Ju-52s below them. Colonel Salisbury assessed the situation in seconds. The Spitfires engaged the escort, climbing, turning, pulling the German fighters up and away from the transports. The P-40s went low. What followed was not a dogfight in any traditional sense. There was no equal contest here, no matching of skill against skill at comparable speeds. The Warhawks had speed and surprise, and they used both without hesitation. They came in from the sides, from behind, from below. The Ju-52s had almost nowhere to go. Dropping lower meant hitting the water. Climbing meant exposing themselves further. Turning was agonizingly slow. The formation that had looked so orderly from a distance began to come apart. Planes peeled off. Smoke trails appeared. Some transports nosed toward the sea. Others turned back west toward Sicily, pursued by fighters that would not let them go. The radio chatter from the American pilots recorded in after-action reports is almost businesslike. Target acquired. Break. I have one. 2 of them going down on the left. 20 minutes. That is all it took. In 20 minutes of combat over the Gulf of Tunis, on a Sunday afternoon that started out ordinary and ended in chaos, the air bridge that Germany depended on to sustain its last army in Africa was effectively broken. The full accounting would take hours, days even. But by the time the last P-40 turned back toward Tunisia, the surface of the water below was not empty anymore. The first pass lasted seconds. The P-40s came in low and fast, skimming just above the water, closing on the rear of the German formation before the escorts had time to react. The Ju-52s filled the gun sights completely. They were that big, that slow, that close together. The lead elements of the 57th broke left and right, spreading the attack across the full width of the formation. No single point of pressure, everywhere at once. A Ju-52 at full load weighs nearly 10,000 kilograms. It carries a crew of 3. It flies at roughly 250 kilometers per hour at cruise speed. Against a P-40 diving at nearly 500, the math is brutal. The transport has no meaningful ability to evade. What it has are the defensive guns, a 13mm machine gun in the dorsal position and a pair of 7.9mm weapons at the side windows. In practice, with a fighter closing that fast from an oblique angle, nearly useless. The first transports began going down within 90 seconds of initial contact. Some caught fire immediately. The Ju-52 carried large fuel tanks and the Avgas ignited fast. Others absorbed hits, lost an engine, lost 2, and began the long descending arc toward the water. A few attempted violent turns, breaking formation, scattering. That made it worse. Isolated, a Ju-52 was even more vulnerable. The escort fighters, the Bf-109s, reacted quickly. Some dove to intercept. The Spitfires above came down hard on them, pulling them into turning fights at altitude, keeping them occupied, keeping them away from the carnage below. A handful of Messerschmitts punched through anyway. A few P-40s took hits. 6 of them would not return to base. 6 out of 47. The German escorts fought with everything they had, but the geometry of the situation was impossible. Too many transports spread across too wide a formation. Too few fighters to be everywhere at once. Every time a Messerschmitt broke off to chase a P-40, 3 more Warhawks pressed in on the undefended transports behind it. The surface of the Gulf of Tunis began to change. Columns of black smoke, oil spreading in slow circles on the flat water. Debris, wreckage that, from altitude, looked almost abstract, geometric, wrong shapes against the blue. The radio discipline of the American pilots held for the first few minutes. Then it started to fray. Not with panic, with the opposite. A kind of electric urgency. Voices calling out positions, targets, warnings. The language clipped, functional. The vocabulary of men doing something they had trained for and were now doing at full intensity. One pilot described the transports as so tightly packed, he missed his intended target and hit the one flying just beyond it. The whole engagement lasted between 15 and 20 minutes. By the time it was over, the sky where the German formation had been was empty of anything still flying northeast. What remained were scattered, trailing survivors, some turning back toward Sicily, some making emergency approaches toward the coast, smoke pouring from damaged engines. The pilots of the 57th returned to base and reported what they had seen. The claims they filed were staggering. Over 140 aircraft confirmed or probably destroyed. The number was later reduced, adjusted, cross-referenced against other sources. But even the conservative figure was almost unimaginable. Numbers in war are complicated. The pilots who came back to their airfields on the afternoon of April 18th were not lying. They had seen aircraft going down. They had seen fire. They had seen wreckage hitting the water. In the chaos of a massed engagement, with dozens of planes in a confined space, over open sea, with no way to physically confirm every claim, overcounting was inevitable, not dishonesty, physics. 2 pilots shooting at the same aircraft from different angles, both watching it go down, both filing separate claims. The same plane, counted twice, counted 3 times. The initial American claim was over 140 aircraft destroyed. It was a number that caused raised eyebrows even among the people who received it. The revised figure after review settled at approximately 74 confirmed. German records tell a different story, a more specific one. Luftwaffe documentation examined after the war confirms the loss of at least 24 Ju-52s that went down over the water and were written off as total losses. Another 35 reached land but were written off as well, crashed on emergency strips along the Sicilian coastline, damaged beyond repair, stripped for parts and abandoned. The total, by any realistic accounting, was somewhere between 50 and 60 transports destroyed or permanently removed from service. In a single engagement, in 20 minutes. The human cost inside those aircraft is harder to reconstruct. The Ju-52s were not empty. They carried troops, technicians, wounded men being evacuated back to Sicily for medical treatment. The transport crews themselves, men who flew an unglamorous and increasingly suicidal mission day after day because someone had to. The sea does not keep records. On the Allied side, the numbers are precise. 6 P-40 Warhawks failed to return. 1 Spitfire was lost, 7 aircraft total, against a German formation that had numbered in the dozens. The asymmetry is difficult to fully absorb. The engagement of April 18th was not the only action under Operation Flax. The Allies had been hunting the air bridge for weeks, but Palm Sunday was the peak, the single worst day the Luftwaffe transport arm ever experienced in the Mediterranean theater, perhaps in any theater. The Germans attempted to continue the air bridge after April 18th. The attempts became progressively more desperate, more costly, less effective. Fighter escorts were strengthened, routes were changed, timing was varied, none of it mattered. Ultra was still reading the mail. By the time the last Axis forces in Tunisia surrendered on May 13, 1943, the air bridge had been effectively destroyed as a strategic capability. Over 275,000 Axis soldiers went into captivity. The supply of weapons, the evacuation of key personnel, the desperate final attempts to sustain a collapsing army, all of it cut off. The Ju-52s that survived April 18th were transferred, redeployed, used in other theaters where the air was less lethal. The airspace over the Gulf of Tunis, by May, belonged entirely to the Allies. History remembers the dramatic moments, the charge, the last stand, the miracle comeback. What history sometimes forgets is the infrastructure of victory, the unglamorous, technical, invisible machinery that makes the dramatic moments possible. Palm Sunday, 1943, is a story about that machinery. Start with Ultra. The ability to read German encrypted communications was arguably the single most consequential intelligence advantage of the entire Second World War. Winston Churchill reportedly called the Bletchley Park operation his secret weapon. The details of Ultra were classified until 1974. For 30 years after the war ended, the men and women who worked at Bletchley Park could not tell their families, their friends, their children what they had done. Palm Sunday happened because of them. Without Ultra, the 57th Fighter Group might have been flying a routine patrol on April 18th. They might have been refueling. They might have been anywhere. The German formation would have crossed the Gulf of Tunis unmolested, delivered its cargo, and returned to Sicily. Another day, another crossing. Instead, 59 fighters were positioned at exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, with exactly the right information. The P-40 pilots deserve their credit. They flew the mission with precision and aggression. They executed a complex, fast-moving engagement against a numerically superior overall force and came away with losses that by any measure were astonishing. But they were handed the opportunity. They did not find it themselves. The battle also illustrates something specific about how air power actually works. The Ju-52 formations were not militarily weak because the aircraft were poorly built or the crews were cowards. They were weak because of context, speed differential, altitude disadvantage, numerical imbalance in the fighter escort. Change any one of those variables and the outcome shifts. The Germans understood this. They tried to change the variables. They added more escorts. They flew at lower altitudes. They changed departure times. What they could not change was the fundamental exposure of a slow transport aircraft over open water. A Ju-52 over the Mediterranean in 1943, without overwhelming fighter cover, was already compromised before it left the runway. The loss of the transport fleet in the Mediterranean had consequences that cascaded outward through the rest of the war. Aircraft and experienced crews lost over Tunisia could not be reconstituted quickly. The Luftwaffe's transport capacity, never generous, was permanently reduced. When Germany needed air transport for other operations, the resources were simply not there in the same way. More immediately, the Afrika Korps and its allied Italian forces had no way out. Over 275,000 soldiers surrendered. Gone from the order of battle entirely, the loss was comparable in raw numbers to Stalingrad. Two catastrophic defeats within months of each other. Two army groups consumed. Africa was over. The road to Sicily, to Italy, to the eventual collapse of the southern axis ran through a stretch of open water over the Gulf of Tunis and through 20 minutes of violence on a Sunday afternoon in April. The Gulf of Tunis is blue and quiet now. If you fly over it today, on a commercial flight from Palermo to Tunis, you see nothing below but water. Flat, indifferent, ancient. The sea does not mark the places where things happened. It simply continues. Somewhere down there, in the silt and the cold, are pieces of Junkers Ju-52s, corrugated aluminum panels, engine blocks, landing gear, objects that were airborne for the last time on a Sunday afternoon in April 1943. Objects that carried men who had names and letters in their pockets and people waiting for them somewhere. The codebreakers who made the interception possible never got a parade. The pilots who flew that morning are almost all gone now. The last few who gave interviews in their final years described it the same way. Not with pride, exactly, with something more complicated. The clinical language of men who had processed something large and were still, decades later, not entirely finished with it. Colonel Salisbury's group flew other missions after April 18th. The war continued for 2 more years. There were harder days ahead, other skies, other losses. But Palm Sunday stayed with them. 20 minutes, a sky full of planes, and then not. Some questions do not resolve cleanly. What exactly is the weight of 20 minutes? How many crossings did those surviving transports make after the war, carrying mail, carrying tourists, carrying ordinary cargo between ordinary cities, their corrugated skin still bearing the faintest ghost of old paint? The Gulf does not answer. It was blue then, it is blue now, and it keeps everything it was given.